You've heard of high net worth, but we're talking about high net purpose. We want to find out how entrepreneurs, global leaders in our network are allocating financial, human, and intellectual capital in pursuit of purpose. But more importantly, we want to understand the compromises, the paradoxes in their approaches, pitch decks, and philosophies.
What does it take to bring life back to a land where nothing wild remains? To turn empty, overhunted landscapes into thriving ecosystems and prove that conservation can fuel economies, empower communities, and even help stabilize nations. Few people on Earth are responsible for protecting more of it than Peter Fearnhead. As the CEO and co-founder of African Parks, he leads one of the most ambitious conservation projects on the planet, managing 24 parks across 13 countries, covering more than 20 million hectares of wild Africa. His mission? To show that conservation isn't just about charity, it's about strategy and systemic impact. Over the course of our conversation, you learn how conservation could be the missing key to solving wider economic, humanitarian, and climate issues. Also, the secrets to influencing governments, investors, and communities behind a shared mission. Also, what true leadership looks like running a fast-growing organization in some of the most hostile environments on the planet. This is the Peter Fearnhead episode. Peter Fearnhead, welcome to High Net Purpose.
Great, Joe. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor.
You're not in your natural habitat when you're in London and these European cities. How does it feel?
This is me at my most awkward. So in terms of cameras, lights, things like that, I'd much rather be out in one of the parks that we manage in Africa, but this is an important part of what we do. So just an absolute pleasure to be here.
So we usually have the same question to kick off, which is, do you, Peter, have an articulation of your purpose?
Yes, I do. So I was born in Africa, grew up in Africa. As a young boy, I was always passionate about nature, about wildlife, about these incredible areas that Africa is so known for. And not just known for in terms of the National Geographic, the wildebeest and the Serengeti, but when you look at how important nature is to local people in Africa, in terms of how many people nature sustains in Africa, and how nature has shaped the cultures of almost every different ethnic grouping on the continent, the importance of nature in Africa is it's almost everything in many ways. And I've grown up with that, and of course the understanding of that over the years, over the journey, has changed and has matured. But I'm deeply passionate about it, and I think in many ways African Parks is an articulation of that. So we are trying to make sure that these areas that define Africa are there in the future, because and Africa without its wildlife and without its landscapes is definitely going to be a more impoverished Africa than one that somehow where we're able to retain these areas for what they are, and that those are part of Africa's future.
And in your childhood, was there a few things that sort of kicked off the passion for wildlife, or was it just the environment that you were brought up in?
What I do think had a profound effect on me was I went to a boys' boarding school, and the school employed a teacher that was one of the country's leading ornithologists. And I think we spent more time out of the classroom than in the classroom. So, at a very early age, I got my bird ringing license. I was doing taxidermy. At the age of 13, we set up a game reserve on the school property. It wasn't very big. It was probably a couple of thousand acres. And but as schoolboys, we were building the dams, we were building the roads, we were doing the restocking, we were doing the fire management, and it was all a huge amount of fun. It just was what I enjoyed doing. And in many ways, what we're doing now is the same thing, but at scale, and it's more complicated, and there's more people, but it's essentially the same thing. But so that was a very, very informative part of my life.
What allowed you to start African Parks in in 2000?
After university, I then went and joined South African National Park. So that was a state institution. Actually, sorry, I spent 2 years doing strategy consulting for one of the big consulting firms.
Deloitte?
With Deloitte, that's right. And that was helpful because it taught me a lot of disciplines, a lot of applications, and a little bit, real exposure to business. And then I joined South African National Parks, and that was a really important time for me because what I tried to do was, this was quite an old state institution in South Africa, very much an organization which was, if I say coming out of the apartheid era and with a lot of the limitations of that. And so together with the chief executive, a guy by the name of Mvuzo Msamang, so one of the co-founders of African Parks, and a chap called Anthony Hall Martin, who was also at South African National Parks. The three of us just got on incredibly well together. And what we did at South African National Parks, we literally took an organization that was on the verge of bankruptcy. I'll never forget December 1999, we were not able to pay salaries. And for me, that was the best thing possible because no one wanted to listen to me until literally salaries weren't being paid. Then everyone said, okay, maybe we must listen to this young guy, hear what he's got to say. And that was the opportunity to bring in change into the organization. And literally over the next couple of years and the next 3 years, we turned that organization around from being financially bankrupt to probably being on the strongest financial footing it's ever been on. If you think about it from a point of view of an organization that is sitting on the best real estate in the entire country and is bankrupt. That's a result of just management inefficiencies and just ways of thinking rather than because it has to be. So we turned that organization around in a very, very positive way. And so many of those elements were the elements then that we then built African Parks on.
So I think this concept of taking distressed assets and restructuring them and turning them around is something that we'll see as a constant as we get into the model for Africa Parks. But you pioneered what became this public-private model. Can you give us a understanding of what that is?
So, the whole public-private partnership concept is something which is, quite well known. If I say across the kind of the modern Western world, and with the liberalization, opening up of different economies, and we've seen in the health sector, we've seen the transport sector, we've seen it in so many different places. But in conservation, it was always, because there isn't really a commercial opportunity per se, it was always the laggard. It was always the one that there wasn't that innovation taking place. So all we did was we took some of those principles and then applied it to conservation. I might add, by the way, that we, as much as we call them PPPs, we always say the 3 Ps stand for patience, politeness, and perseverance. So you've got to be a hell of a patient in doing this. It's so important because they are public assets. You've got to be super polite in all of the engagements. But man, you've got to persevere and persevere and persevere. And then eventually you get the job done.
Because these are usually models of where you've got a public asset that's not been well managed or could be more optimally managed, and the private sector comes in on some type of a contract to manage them differently. But this was taking this into conservation and at scale in some of the most hostile parts of the planet.
The scale element has come with time. So obviously we didn't start with scale. We started with one project, we started with 2 projects within 30 days of each other. But at the time, convincing a government that they've got to relinquish direct managerial control, that we're not actually owning the asset. This is their asset and it remains theirs. The policy, the legislation remains their legislation, but we want to have execution responsibility. So if we say that a patrol needs to leave at 8 o'clock in the morning, it needs to leave at 8 o'clock in the morning. And unless you've got that kind of ability to make sure that kind of stuff happens, actually at the end of the day, you're advising around the edges of it. Nothing gets done, nothing changes, and so you don't get the results that are necessary.
But in practice, you're looking at a failing park, and you go to the government and you convince them to say, give it to us on a long lease. Is that what it is to take it over?
Yeah. So it's not really a lease, because what we don't do is we lease tends to be associated with a payment for taking it on. And we don't pay governments to do what we do. We're happy to do what is a public function that all of these governments have signed up in terms of the Biodiversity Convention. They've undertaken, they've made a global commitment to look after these really, really important conservation assets. So what we're happy to do is step in and do that on their behalf. So we call it the Public-Private Partnership Agreement. We can call it a mandate. We can call it a collaborative management agreement. There are different ways of framing exactly the same thing. But in that mandate, there's typically long-term. So we like 20 years and ideally with a right to renew. Conservation takes a long time to get right. So we want a long-term commitment from government where we have the ability to manage literally every factor in that protected area. Anything that's going to make it a success or any risk factor, we want to be able to change the outcome. So it's a total solution for that area. Now, we might crowd in the odd partner ourselves to be able to help with an element here or there. But essentially, if you've got full responsibility from government, then that means you also have full accountability to government. And that separation of the regulatory role, so the ownership, legislative and regulatory function from government, from the execution role, which is what we're responsible for, what you are inherently doing is creating a governance design where you've now got an inbuilt check and balance.
And I know there's a variety of different parks where you've got land and you've got some marine, etc. But what would be the sort of the top things that you will do when you go in?
Typically what we do is there'll be 5 areas of work. Conservation law enforcement. It is one of the areas that is a little bit controversial, but unless you are making sure that the laws that are designed to restrict in some way or other the utilization of resources, whether it's restrictions on the land because it's set aside for conservation, not for agriculture, not for mining, whether it is setting aside, how the wildlife is used, people can't come and either poach it or just hunt it or do whatever they want with it, whether it is laws on types of development that can take place in the area. So typically a country has a set of conservation laws, and the implementation and the adherence to those laws is absolutely fundamental to everything else. And I might add, by the way, that by making sure that you've got well-trained people, well-disciplined, well-equipped, what starts to happen, and particularly in some of the really difficult parts of Africa, and we operate in some really challenging countries and challenging contexts, but that law enforcement overlay becomes a really important for the stabilization of the entire area. Because if you take a park like Zakuma National Park in Chad, if you've got people coming in from North Sudan to come and poach elephant, they're not just coming to poach elephant. On the way, they are literally raping, pillaging, plundering.
Yeah.
So an elephant poacher is not a good person except when he's poaching elephant. He's often a person that is breaking multiple laws of the land. So by bringing about that stability, safety, and security, it's not just the elephants that benefit, and I'm using elephants metaphorically, it's basically the entire area benefits from the stability that you bring about.
It's a system, but you're bringing in a number of solutions,
Exactly.
and it is armed rangers in some, it is education locally.
100%, yeah.
It is dogs, it is everything to protect the site.
Yeah, so it starts with having, rangers absolutely critical. They must be well trained and they must be disciplined, and there's no excuse if they're not. They are armed. They're armed because they are number one, the types of people that are extracting these resources illegal are often armed. If you've got terrorism groups, they are armed. And simply, a lot of these places with buffalo, elephant, lion, they're also, you've got to make sure that they're armed just within the environment that they're in to make sure that they are protected. They also have a right to life. So the law enforcement is a key element. You alluded to it as well. The relationship with local people is absolutely essential. So we often say that the de jure arrangement is with government typically at a senior level, but the de facto solution comes from the relationships with local people. So very quickly, we want them to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it. Invariably, they're completely aligned with that because they are often dependent on those natural resources. And then you want to make sure that those local people are benefiting in a way that the future of the park is aligned to their future. Because if you're doing that, now you've got tailwinds. So just an example of that, if Liwa Plain National Park in Zambia, one of the oldest national parks in the world, arguably might even predate Yellowstone National Park in the United States. So very, very old history of a real conservation ethic. But that is a system where there's a couple of hundred fishing pools that all have fish in them. And there's a very sophisticated system of particular villages, particular families that have access rights to a particular pool to be able to enjoy the fish that come out of there. So it's the protein source for those people. Now, it's not the village that has the legal access rights, even if it's in a traditional form, to the pool. They're never the problem. What's the problem is that people come from the copper belt in Zambia and they come with their mosquito nets. They are sewn together 100 meters along and they strip every single living thing out of that pool. So whose resource are those people stealing? They're not stealing our resources, African parks. They're stealing the protein source for a village that does not have another protein source to sustain them through the season. So that's who they're stealing from. So when you talk conservation law enforcement, you are literally implementing the laws of the land, both formal and traditional, to make sure that the legitimate users or beneficiaries of the resource are the ones that actually do end up using the resource. And that's a key part of it. And that's something that is completely intertwined with the whole community dimension. So that community element is a key thing that we do as well. Then there's just to make sure I finish your question on the, what do we do? What do we implement? The elements of the model. The third element then is we do want to build what we call a conservation-led economy. So through things like tourism, associated enterprise, it can be fisheries. So it is trying to build a formal economy that people can be employed in and can be generating an income out of. And it can be large and it can be small. In order to make sure that you've got people aligned with the future of the project. And then a really key dimension as well is all the infrastructure. So it is the roads, it's the telecommunications, it's the logistics. It sometimes is the aerial support, it's ground support. It is the workshops, the headquarters, the housing for staff. So everything that you need to be able to make a park function and function effectively, we do all of that as well.
Because we may have missed the part of the actual animals as well, right? So you're also translocating in the animals and all the flora and fauna
that's a real oversight for a conservationist. So yes, and you're completely right. So almost every park that we step into, because there's been a period of lack of management or poor management, every single one that we've stepped into, there's been one or more species that is missing from the system. And it's easy if it's one species. In our first park in Malawi, it was every single species bigger than a scrub hare. So literally all large mammals had been wiped out of that system.
In Majeti?
In Majeti in Malawi. So every single animal that you see in Malawi, in Majeti today, and you'll see plenty, every single thing has been brought back. So, and we try to bring it back in sufficient numbers to be able to, it's like investment management. If you're getting good investments and you compound over time, it's no different with wildlife. It is an asset, and if you look after it, the numbers build up over time. But you ideally want to start with a founder population of each species that's large enough where it compounds and grows into and reaches a kind of a mature threshold early, rather than 20 or 30 years down the line. So the restocking of wildlife, absolutely critical. Bring all the species back again. You typically do that with the what we call plains game first, so your antelope species. bring those back again. Things like elephant. We've done some big elephant translocations. We've restocked one of our parks with 500 elephant. So that's taking 500 elephant out of 2 other source parks to be able to stock into another one. Things like black rhino. And I'm talking specifically about Majetti here. And then you allow all of those populations to settle down. And then once the populations have settled and the numbers are starting to build, then you can put your predator overlay in, your leopards, your wild dog, your cheetah. And then after a little bit of time, then you can bring lion back. So there is a bit of a phased reintroduction, but it is, it's a fascinating process to be involved in and to be part of.
It's a good, because you said, you started off at a lower scale. Majetti is probably about the size of the M25 in London in terms of the scale of what's inside it. And I visited it a couple of weeks ago, and it's, you fall over wildlife everywhere. There's now 80 lions in there.
Yeah.
There's the bird populations, the elephants, there's hippos. There's just everything everywhere.
Yeah.
And that park, when you went into it, was pretty much dead in terms
and Majetti is, it's ironically, I think it is our second smallest park.
Wow.
So, if you've been there, and then you see how big it is, and the M25 comparison is helpful. But I mean, literally that park, on the starting point, it had no wildlife. There were 12 rangers. They had not been paid, I think, in over 6 months or 9 months. It had not received a single visitor in 3 years, because why would a visitor go there? So it was having no impact on the Malawian economy at all. Now, if you look at what it's doing today, it has got every single species that should be there. Those species have done so well that Majetti now is a source for restocking species in other protected areas in Malawi, because it's able to do so. It can sustain the offtake. So we've taken elephant out, we've taken lion out, we've taken leopard out, we've taken all the plains game species to be able to restock other areas. So it's gone from being a sink to being a source. In terms of tourism, I think we generate now about $1 million a year. So there's a tourism flow. So that means job creation that goes with it. It's the foreign exchange generation. In terms of employment, I think it now employs 250 people. You might have asked that question when you were there.
Yeah.
But
it's the communities around it as well. So one of your colleagues kindly dropped me into one of the local villages and left me there for a few hours.
Okay.
And where the locals explained to me really proudly the relationship with the park.
Yes.
Because as an outsider coming in, you're immediately feeling, well, hang on, these are indigenous people. Why have they lost access to that land?
Yes.
And they were proud of the agriculture and the sustainability they'd built, and for their families and the healthcare and everything they'd had. And it was amazing to see.
Yeah, and it is one of the most important parts of what we do. So we have basically 3 objectives for every park. The first objective is the total ecological restoration. So we want the full ecology of the area to be restored and to be functioning in as natural a state as possible. And that's the wildlife side of things. The third dimension then is that there is the financial sustainability, is that there is enough money to be able to manage properly. Ideally, as much as possible generated from the enterprise of managing the park. And to the extent that there's a gap, then we basically crowd in donor support, whether it's from institutions like the European Commission or philanthropic support. We crowd that in. But that second objective is what we call building a constituency for conservation, an active constituency for conservation. And that means that local people living either in the park, because Majetti is one of the few parks that we have as fenced, so it's a very hard boundary with people. But most of these parks that we manage are open systems where people are living in the system. So they're dealing with wildlife and living with it on a day-to-day basis. And you want them to understand conservation and to be completely supportive of it.
And your goal is to get to 30 parks by 2030. How do you think about adding more parks? Is there a criterion list before you'll go in somewhere now?
Yeah, there is. And it's so I think the first thing is we feel that we have a responsibility to scale. We've got to do more. If you look at the state of the planet, the state of the decline of nature on the planet, Africa is 25% of all biodiversity is in Africa. So and we're losing it because it's not being well managed, because it's not being well protected. So we've got the 24, but we need to go to 25. We need to go to 28. We need to go to 30. You got to do it one by one by one. I wish we could do it 5 by 5. If there was a solution to be able to do more quicker, we would. But we've got that responsibility to grow from the current 24 to the 30. In terms of the way we go about that, it's not formulaic. It is, every one of these is a state asset owned by government and controlled by government. So they have to want us to do it in order for us to make that commitment. So that political will has to be there. We also want to make sure that because we've got limited management capacity and because we're having to crowd in donor funding, if we've got one manager that we've got available that we want to apply to an area, it must be an important area. So, and equally, if we've got a donor dollar to spend, it must be spent where the impact is highest, where the return on the conservation return on investment is the highest. So typically we're looking for important conservation assets. We've been asked to do so many where they are either small or relatively unimportant. They might be important at a very, very local level, but not a national level and definitely not at a continental level. So we're going for the most important because that's where that return on investment is greatest.
Are you competing against anyone else, or are you running a monopoly where you have 25 years of track record, you can pick where you want to go?
It's a really good question. It's we are because we were the first out the starting blocks on the approach, and I do think because of the results that we deliver, we are by far and away the largest in this approach. So I think now across the continent there are 50 of these collaborative management partnerships, of which 50% of those are being done by African Parks, and then the others are done mostly by organizations that are doing 1 or doing 2, 3 or 4. So relatively small. But so even though it might sound a little bit like a monopoly, our whole approach in terms of what we're doing is we have this thing called now, and it's a little bit of a business term, but it's we have an incubator program where what we're trying to do is to develop other organizations to do what we're doing. And it was actually one of our board members said to me when I was proposing this. So he said, "So you're actually creating competition for yourself, Peter?" And I said, "Yes, we are, because competition is healthy in a market. So it's not an unhealthy thing." They said, "Okay, but so what happens if government then gives an area to that particular organization, or if a donor dollar goes there?" I said, "But that's exactly what competition is, and that's the benefit of it. And if they're doing that one, it means we can do another one." So what we're trying to do is make sure that as many of these really important areas in Africa are managed well. At a personal parochial level, I want to make sure that African Parks is the best in the business. I don't want to be second best. No one that works for African Parks want to be second best. But more important than that is that these areas are managed, and therefore we've got to put our parochial interests aside, and we've got to help other organizations to do the job as well as they can. And so as much as we manage the 24 parks now, I think we have in terms of our incubator partners, we've got 6 organizations that we're helping, and I think that they've got 8 other protected areas that they are managing, that we are helping them to manage. So that's going to be one of our scaling mechanisms.
So monopoly is a real mischaracterization of what's happened. You've been the first mover, you've become the largest in the private sector, you've got the massive incumbent in terms of governments that own and manage all this land as well. But you're developing the market as well for other competitors, if you like, to come in. What have you learned about influence?
I think influence should be completely authentic. So if you're trying to put a spin on anything to anyone, whether it's to a government, whether it's to a donor, or whether it's to a staff member that's going to be sent out into a high risk area, I think you are doing a disservice to your long-term vision of what you're trying to achieve. So being completely authentic and completely honest about what we can do, how we can do it, what the conditions are, I think it's really, really important to be that. And I think by being genuine, by being authentic, I think that just adds to your credibility. It might not be what everyone wants to hear in the moment, but I think if you keep saying it, it also means you're never going to trip yourself up along the journey, because they're never going to say, "Oh, but you said." And a lot of these societies, particularly very, very local societies, they remember every word that you say. And if you've overpromised and underdelivered, they're going to hold you to account. So being authentic, being honest with them, being realistic is, and again, whether it's a president, whether it's a very, very local community member, whether it's a multi-billionaire or whether it is a tourist, just be authentic, be honest. And that at the end of the day, I think is probably it's not going to help in the very, very short term, but I think in the medium to long term always plays itself out.
So the people that I've met at a few of your parks, it's just amazing.
Yeah, they are, aren't they? Yeah. It makes me smile. Yeah.
Yeah, you just meet these individuals, whether it's John who's running Majetti or the former pro rugby player who runs the Rhino, he's a highly educated, highly articulate. He talks like he works for McKinsey, but he looks like a rhino himself, and he's out there. I mean, in a nice way. He's a very handsome man, but
superb individual.
Yeah. How do you attract these people? And also, just everyone you meet tends to just have this deep vocation sort of element to how they do what they do. Yeah. And they work around the clock and they seem relentless.
I sometimes think my job is hard, but I tell you, the job that these people do is just incredible. So, I'm hugely grateful to guys like John, Don, and 6,500 people that are doing the work, every single one of them. We have a value system, which is, I think, speaks to exactly who we are, and also reinforces who we are. And our number one value is that we are passionate about Africa, passionate about wildlife conservation, and passionate about the people of Africa. And I think that the single thing that binds them, despite how remarkably diverse all of these people are and where they come from, I think that single thing binds every single one of them. They are all deeply, deeply passionate people. And as a result of that, they work incredibly hard. They are just so committed. And, if there was to be a self-criticism, and this might sound like a weird thing for a CEO to say, I think our people work too hard. They burn the candle at both ends, long and hard, and over a sustained period of time, and we are super conscious of that. And I say that earnestly. We have a 10th value, which is also have fun, connect with what we do. These people are passionate about what they're doing. So by connecting with what they do is an opportunity to recharge batteries and get a little bit of wow, aren't these places incredible?
What have you learned about selecting the right people?
It's hard. Yeah, really hard. So, just to use an example, I selected a very senior individual going back quite some years ago, and we went through a very rigorous process with all the help that we could get from everyone. And probably within 2 months, I just thought, this is just not this person is just not us, and it's not going to work. And I spoke to the chairman at the time, who'd run a very, very big organization. And I just said, I think we've got this completely wrong. And he said to me, Peter, if you're bringing someone from the outside, it's going to be one time out of two, you're going to get it wrong. The important thing is to recognize when you've got it wrong and act quickly. Yeah. And he said, in my entire career as this CEO of an organization, I think it was 30,000 people, he said, I never got better at 1:2 ratio in terms of getting it right. And that made me feel a whole lot better. So make the mistake, but recognize it quickly.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean, I'm not saying be flippant in the way that you approach employment, but finding the right people that are genuinely committed. Lots of people love the idea of what we do, but living it and being real in it is incredibly hard.
And for you, at the top of the organization, because of the scale and size now, the media will pick up on things immediately and run with them. How do you manage that?
Yeah, and it's not an easy one, because what we do, we often describe it at the sharp end of conservation. We're not advising, we're not kind of supporting on the sidelines. I mean, literally, we are, the man in the arena, to use Roosevelt's words. And because the man in the arena, what that means is there are going to be mistakes. 6,500 people, things do go wrong. And we live in a world where, the wrongs are almost celebrated more than what's going well. And that's hard, but it's the reality. And so I think when things do go wrong, I think one's got to, just accept it, take it on the chin. Is there something that we can learn from it? If there is, that's great. Let's use that as the learning opportunity. We do say one of our other values in the organization is that, mistakes are tolerated, but only if we learn from them. So we have to make sure that it's a learning opportunity. We've got 24 parks. If we make a mistake in one, we'll then apply that learning across all of the others. And that's a little bit the beauty of having the scale now, is not every park that you manage has to make the same mistake in order to be able to learn from it. So, and by the way, we pass on those lessons very, very quickly to our incubator partners as well. So, so things do happen. And when things do happen, those seem to be picked up by the media. They are often used, sometimes, in my view, for the wrong reasons, to make the wrong point, quite often with no context or understanding of the issue. But, the media has a role. It's an important role to play. We take those things on the chin, and we make sure that we're better off for it as a result of it happening. Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we try and spin into some trade-offs really quickly and see if we can take some weighty, giant topics and condense them into a couple of minutes. But I guess, being more serious, when I was in Ethiopia last week, talking to some of the humanitarian agencies about the populations that were coming in from South Sudan, being displaced through the conflict, I was then also looking at these massive antelope migrations that you guys are part of. How do we think about a dollar spent helping those people who are out on these plains with no water, who are completely displaced, versus whether we should be funding antelope?
Yeah. A complex issue.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry, Peter.
And it's first of all, I try to think in as much as there's always an opportunity cost of a dollar. There's either a scarcity mentality of, is there only $1 to spend? Well, then, okay, where does one apply it? Or is there a mentality of, maybe if we go about this and sell the full complexity of it, maybe there's going to be $3 instead of just $1. So I think that's the first part of it. Secondly, because these issues are complex, and if I can use South Sudan as an example, so massive displacement. That displacement is coming from instability. Instability is coming from too many weapons in a system, very poor governance of it over large areas, massive inter-ethnic rivalries, and that's what's creating the instability. I don't want to be too hard on the United Nations, but if we see what's happening in South Sudan, there's no plan in South Sudan. There's nothing that is going to solve the problem that prevents that person, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, or 30 years' time, from being the person that you see then, and you're seeing the consequences of it. So we believe fundamentally that in these massive, massive areas where conservation of wildlife is such a critical part of it, if you can put the governance mechanisms in place, and you can bring through good management to those areas and through those mechanisms stability, safety, and security, or at least be part of the solution, then that person isn't going to end up in Ethiopia in those camps that you've just mentioned. Let me use a very specific example of the interconnectivity between these things. So Harvard University picked up on what is basically the world's biggest methane spike. Where's this methane coming from? It's coming from the Sud in South Sudan. Oh, that's interesting. BBC picks up on the biggest methane spike. They attribute it to the water flows into Lake Victoria and from Lake Victoria down the Nile. Maybe, or maybe that's part of it. Our assessment of it is that might be part of it, but when you have no elephants, no hippos, and no buffalo in that massive, massive area, it means that all the channels that assist with the drainage of into the Nile and then the Nile basically northwards, that function, the roles that wildlife would have played, that is no longer being played because there are no elephant, buffalo, and hippo in that system. At the same time, you've got Juba is dumping all of its waste into the Nile. So every plastic bottle, every plastic bag, every single day is being dumped into the Nile, and all of that's flowing northwards, and it's hitting the Sud, and it is blocking the water flows. So you've got a combination of plastics being dumped into the system and nothing that's opening up the system. And as a result, to use the analogy, you've got a massive, massive giant beaver dam. And that beaver dam is pushing water back, which is creating flooding over literally millions of hectares. And all of the trees in that area are dying. And so you've got this methane spike, you've got this flooding taking place, you've got the displacement that's taking place because of the water, and now you've got what your observation is, what you saw was at the end of the kind of the problem manifesting right at the end of the whole chain of events. We're saying that if you bring good governance to those areas, you bring the wildlife back into it, you obviously address the plastic issue, you open up the waterways by putting wildlife, because elephant and hippo are fantastic. They will do a better job than any man-made machine will ever do. Maybe that's part of the solution.
Okay. Next trade-off. So if we go back to, say, Majetti being highly successful, you now have the easy lines very happily eating their way through all the livestock because it's just abundant everywhere. The easy solution would be we should bring in some hunters. They'll pay a lot of money to shoot some lions, and that will make the park sustainable. Yeah. Why don't we do that?
Sure, Joe. You like to tackle the difficult ones, huh?
Yeah.
That is a solution. It is a solution which in parts of Africa is a little bit the go-to solution. So what we try to do as African parks is we operate within government's, as I said, it's government's park, it's government's legislation, and it's government's policy. So government policy will determine those kinds of utilization. Is there hunting in a park or isn't there hunting in a park? So what we don't try to do is to play government's role. What we like to do is execute what government wants for those areas. So in a particular case in Majetti, we would look to government and we would obviously have conversations. I don't want to pretend that this wouldn't be a conversation that we have with them about whether we introduce a practice like that. It would probably be part of the solution, but it wouldn't be the whole solution. You would still need to shoot female lions. You'd still need to shoot juvenile lions. So, it would be. It would bring in money. Yeah. But it would also create all kinds of issues from if I say the other stakeholders in the park, from a tourism point of view, tourism operators, it would, various funders, I think would be, do they want that to happen as well? So in as much as I say it's a policy-driven issue at the national level, all those other factors are considerations, and the solution. Before getting there, we would typically look at things like, is there an opportunity to translocate those animals? Is there another park that didn't have lions? So, for example, we've used Majeti to restock Lwandi National Park. There could be another park either in Malawi or in the region that's needing lions, and that would always be the first opportunity. Then you can, if there aren't enough of those kinds of opportunities, typically our next layer of solution would be some form of contraception. So you can either do total contraception or partial. You can tie, one fallopian tube of a female lion, and that means instead of giving birth to 4 cubs, she gives birth to 1 or 2 cubs, and so that reduces, it slows down that rate of increase. Taking animals off in terms of hunting, that is a possibility as well. Euthanizing lions is a possibility as well. But whatever that solution is going to be discussed and done with government.
So there's no easy answer, but I think what you've described there is that you guys look at everything,
and
absolutely. You bring in loads of different disciplines in terms of thinking about how to solve these highly complex issues. And the other thing too, I guess, is that maybe we haven't sort of directly spoken to is the on the depth of the conservation in terms of the tracking, blood testing.
Yes.
All of that work that you've got giant teams in all of these parks doing the work and then sharing it across. Is there anything else on that sort of mentioned? But you've got like scaled conservation teams working on that, and some of these animals are highly endangered.
Yeah, I think with the consequences of everything. So with good management, you have consequences. So things like predator numbers building up over time is a consequence of good management, and then. It's that same, by the way, goes with things like elephants as well. So, all of these things, you start with the problem of not having any of these species, you bring them in, and then with good management, then you end up with too many of them. And as much as you need to manage the situation where there's nothing, you also need to manage the situation when there are too many. So, and that is part of the complexity. But in order to be able to do that, we have teams of people that are looking at these kinds of issues. When I say all day, every day, it tends to be a specific issue at a specific time in order to be able to address what that particular issue is, and then another park will have a different issue. But we've got teams of really competent people that are looking at these kinds of things. It's inherent in the work that we do. It's inherent in the people that want to apply for work that typically come with that kind of skill set. So. That is part and parcel of everything. But to the extent that we, have a particular species where the numbers have done really well, and particularly if that's an endangered species, to be able to then use the population that has built up as a source population to be able to take to another area that didn't have any of it, that's when you start having what we call meta-population management, where you're managing a population in a park and another population in a different park, and you can do swapping of animals for genetic reasons, and it starts to have a real impact at a more than just a country level, at a regional level.
For people who are familiar with it, a translocation.
Yes.
So if you take, for example, you've got 2,000 white rhinos in South Africa that you're planning to move in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
What is a translocation of a rhino, and what does it look like?
So we do the translocations as part and parcel of reestablishing a protected area. The slight difference with this now is that with 2,000 animals, that's a huge number of animals. So we're not looking at it just for African parks managed areas. We will put those rhinos into any protected areas that are well managed and have the security in place. But we also want to do that in a way where all white rhinos came out of a single population out of a park called Shishlui-Amfolozi in South Africa. And going back to 1940, there were probably only 40 to 50 animals. So all white rhinos have come from that source. So with that in mind, we want to make sure that as a result of doing what we do, somewhere between 7 to 20 strategic populations of rhino are established across the continent of Africa. So if something goes wrong in one country and they're wiped out there, that there will always be a strategic population to be able to do what we are doing now, only because there was good conservation management back in the 1940s and 50s. So it's a little bit with that in mind that we're doing this. But in terms of what's involved, when you move a rhino, every animal has to be individually crated. So it's a big steel crate. They are loaded into that crate. If you've got a mum and a baby, you've got a small crate and a big crate, they talk to each other through the steel. And they are, the little, baby's happy as a result of that. But you can only move rhino for about 48 hours. If you're pushing them beyond 48 hours, that's just too long for the welfare of the animal. So what that means is, depending on where the animals are going to, if it can be a trucked solution in terms of getting them from the farm to a reserve, if it's in South Africa, that's easy, you can truck it. If you're having to get them to Garamba National Park in DRC or to Akagera in Rwanda, you're having to fly those animals. So just as an example, this year we did 70 animals, I think it was, or maybe 72, into Akagera National Park in Rwanda. That took 2 Boeing 747s with 36 animals each, loaded to capacity, flying them into Kigali, offloading in Kigali, then being trucked from the airport into the reserve. And that whole process has to take place from loading to release within 48 hours. So it's a massive logistical undertaking.
When you look over the last 25 years, what do you think what were the hardest moments?
Maybe it's just because it's so recent. 3 weeks ago, we had our government partner in Chad send us a letter terminating 15 years of work or 15 years of relationship with us, with no opportunity for discussion. Know that this is they did publish what the issues were, but quite frankly, every single one of them was, I think in terms of fact, completely factually incorrect. But when something like that happens, that's on the Monday. On the Friday, you're laying off 550 staff. That's a pretty low moment. Having said that, though, I think what then happened was the relationships that we had built with those communities, the people that had benefited from them, local, provincial, governors and parliamentarians, and when they started to say, what the heck is going on here? How can this decision have been taken? And if it was going to be taken, why wasn't it taken in consultation with us? Because we are the real stakeholders. What happened in this particular country was that you had this massive groundswell saying to government at the full level of government and at a higher level of government, what are you doing? These projects are exceptionally good for us. We support them. We're benefiting from them. And as a result of that, there was a total reversal of that decision. And that was a 2-week process. And it was a 2-week process, not because we waved a magic wand, but because the 15 years of investment in those areas, in those relationships, in the communities that were benefiting from it, that's what changed that situation around. So it went from the most bitter moment to the also very, very sweet moment.
Because headline people will look at it as a nature conservation organization, but some of the numbers out there publicly are that last year you reached 500,000 community members, meetings and event, and close to 100,000 people supported with healthcare.
Yeah. It's a total. When I say it's a total solution, I don't want to say it is it's a complete solution to all problems, because it isn't. We are very clear on what we do. We're very clear on how we go about it, and there are limits to that. But by establishing that governance mechanism, by bringing good quality management to quite large areas, you bring about stability, safety, and security where otherwise there might not be. You bring around economic opportunities for communities which there wouldn't otherwise be, and you reestablish and you manage an ecological system which itself is sustaining hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people. So, we use the Leeuwer example. By protecting the fisheries of every single one of those fish ponds, you are sustaining those communities that are living in that park. Then there are 20,000 people that live in that system. And so it is it really is a total ecological, governance, security, and economic development solution at every one of those 24 areas.
And there's other positive externalities from what you've done that we haven't discussed in terms of climate adaptation, carbon market development. You've managed to find some areas where you're able to create a market for some of the carbon sinks you have.
Yes, we have. So it's an important layer of the overall financial sustainability. Again, it's challenging, both because of the way carbon markets are defined, but equally because sometimes the expectations from governments are completely unrealistic. They think, sometimes I think there's going to be big checks coming their way for not actually doing anything. But, in countries like Benin and Central African Republic, we've been very, very successful in putting carbon projects in place there. And what's fantastic about them is, of the revenue that we receive from that, 100% of that goes to either what I call the carbon factory, so the park that is generating the carbon credit, or it goes to communities, or it goes to government. So every single dollar. So none of it's going into speculative people buying at $2, selling at $15. Whatever's being sold at, it's all going to the field to make an impact to those three critical stakeholders.
Devastating flying over some of the park in Malawi, and you can see all the deforestation on the outside, where people have, they've burnt down the trees in order to make charcoal, and then you see sort of lush forest next to it inside the park. It's real, right? The replacement of forests in these areas. We usually ask the same final questions, which are one, how do you keep yourself well given the stress and the intensity of what you do?
At a personal level, I think we are, and I'm probably speaking here on behalf of many colleagues. I think we are so passionate about what we do, and we are so driven by the importance of it, that gives us energy. It gives us life. There's nothing quite like having purpose in life. And we all have purpose. And I think that gives us a huge amount of energy. So, overcoming these challenges, taking on these areas, seeing the results, seeing what can happen, connecting with the people in the field. People often say to me, where do you go on a holiday to? So I go to the parks, because by going to the parks, you have the time to be able to connect with the areas that we're managing, and you have time to connect with the people that are responsible for the work. And you really get under the bonnet when you spend a week in a park. There's nothing that your teams can hide. I'm not saying that they want to hide, but you get a real sense of what's going on by being able to do that. And I have a family that absolutely loves it as well. So my wife, my children are equally interested and committed to doing it. So being able to spend time in the parks is just the best thing. It's our 10th value, connect with what we do.
So getting out into the bush. And,
absolutely.
Away from the noise and all the folk in London.
And way closer to the problems.
Way closer to the problems. And then the last one, if you were talking to a 20-year-old Peter, what would you say to him?
A few things. I hope that he'd listen. So if I was talking to a 20-year-old Peter, I think it's that to have the courage of your convictions. Listen to people. Be careful of who you listen to, but seek out people who you respect. Listen to them. Factor in what they say, and then have the courage courage of your convictions, courage to pursue. There are going to be things that blindside you that you just never expect. But I think if you're really true to that conviction, I think irrespective of those challenges that come across your path, they tend to self-solve. And I think having that courage to pursue it would be good advice. And the other thing I'd tell him is to go harder and to go faster.
Sound like a tech entrepreneur at the end of it. It's been such a privilege to be able to have the time today to talk through. Thanks for the openness and for because I know it's hard to condense a lot of these big, weighty, fascinating subjects into a short podcast. But I really appreciate it, and thank you for all you do.
Oh, pleasure, Joe, and thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for the questioning, the interest. I mean, it's clear that you've really invested in understanding what we're about. So deeply appreciate the conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
All content on High Net Purpose is provided as general information only. It does not constitute any advice, recommendation, or representations, and is not intended to influence listeners or users into making any specific investments or any other decisions. Please be aware that guests and presenters on High Net Purpose may have investments in any of the topics or products being discussed. Their reviews and opinions are their own and should not be taken as endorsements or financial advice. Before making financial decisions, we strongly recommend seeking advice from a qualified financial professional. This podcast may not be copied, reproduced, further distributed, or published in whole or part.